At least 3 decades after the Mimic's origin story, Edwin Murray returns in The Storyteller, now at the age of 64. After David's death, Edwin ran as far away as he could all across the world until eventually he ran out of money, and had to demand that Fazbear Entertainment honor the buyout of his company. Now he's one of Fazbear's board members, and he has to deal with Mr. Burrows, the 35-year-old board chairman with a very high opinion of himself. Edwin doesn't want to listen to Mr. Burrows or even be at the meeting, but he says he has to keep the board thinking straight. Case in point, Mr. Burrows suggests firing the Mega Pizzaplex creative development team to save some money. Edwin and Mr. Burrows fight over this for a bit, but Mr. Burrows and the board decide to replace the creative team with the Storyteller, an artificial intelligence program that takes pieces of previously created stories and rearranges them into new scenarios for VR, AR, and arcade games. Despite this story being written around 2021, this lends some commentary to the sadly modern practices of AI replacing creative jobs. Mr. Burrows gives Edwin a consultant role on the Storyteller project, which personally I believe is to further insult him, but Edwin knows a lot of things could go wrong with the Storyteller and decides to keep it together so he can prevent a tragedy. The board continues to ignore his concerns and instead discusses what the Storyteller would look like. Mr. Burrows mentions that maybe they'll let the Storyteller decide its appearance, and I'm sure that won't be important later. As the board members chatter on, Edwin zones out and reflects on his past mistakes. This story came out before the Mimic's origin story, so it never outright mentions David or the Mimic, but with that context, the scene is much more impactful. It's mentioned that he keeps vintage Freddy's posters in his home as a way to punish himself for his past mistakes that eventually led to David's death. Back in the present, the board decides to move forward with the Storyteller, and Edwin gets a strong sense of deja vu, likely as a reference to the Mimic, Edwin's own AI program that went horribly wrong. The Storyteller's development goes by at the speed of light. Everyone except Edwin is thrilled to be working on it. He isn't allowed to see the Storyteller's specs, which makes him nervous. Edwin rarely gave opinions on the project. He suggested that the Storyteller be refined to a remote part of the Pizzaplex, to give it a mysterious aura. In reality, he suggested that in case it became a problem. Regardless, he's ignored and is constructed in the center of the Pizzaplex's atrium. The design team decides the Storyteller should be housed inside a tree, but they argue about what type. Edwin suggests a baobab tree, one of the longest living trees in the world and the hardiest, thriving in the harshest of conditions. The board likes this idea, so a giant baobab tree was constructed in the Pizzaplex's atrium, although the bright and shiny vibrant yellow tree hardly resembles any real tree. LEDs made up the tree's root system, which stretched out from the tree and sunk into the floor. The roots are actually a network of wiring connecting the Storyteller to all the story-driven attractions and feeding the information to the appropriate hardware, meaning that every animatronic in the Pizzaplex would get instructions from the Storyteller. Edwin isn't allowed inside the tree, which bothers him, but Mr. Burrows claims that only the construction team is allowed in there. Edwin doesn't trust him and decides he needs to see what's going on for himself. He gathers up some cryptid memos referring to the construction, and finds out the larger parts of the Storyteller are being transferred into the tree later that night.